The dinner rush was already in full swing when she tied her apron around her waist and took a deep breath behind the swinging kitchen door. The sound of clinking glasses, quick footsteps, and bursts of laughter spilled out into the corridor. The smell of roasted meat, garlic butter, and freshly baked bread filled the air. It was another long night at the Silver Oaks restaurant, a place that looked elegant from the outside but was filled with constant noise and exhaustion behind the scenes. She had worked here for almost a year now. It wasn't her dream job, but it paid enough to cover her rent and her mother's medical bills. Every morning she promised herself she'd look for something better, but by the time she came home at midnight, her feet aching and her head pounding, that promise faded into tomorrow. Her name was Lena, 24, quiet, polite, and always tired. She had once imagined herself sitting on a stage, not standing in a uniform taking orders. In another life, she saw herself behind a grand piano, surrounded by music, not noise. But dreams don't pay bills, and in her world, survival had taken the place of ambition. She stepped out into the main hall, carrying a tray of drinks for a table of 6. The guests were laughing loudly, their expensive suits and jewelry glimmering in the light. Lena smiled, set the glasses down one by one, and murmured the practiced words, "Is there anything else I can bring you tonight?" One of the men waved her off with a nod, not even looking at her. She smiled again and turned away. She was used to that kind of thing. Being invisible was part of the job. Across the room, her manager stood near the bar, his hands behind his back, scanning every corner like a general on a battlefield. He was strict and sharp-eyed, the kind of person who noticed if your hair was slightly out of place or if a glass wasn't polished enough. Lena had learned to stay out of his way as much as possible. But no matter how hard the days were, she always found small moments of peace. Sometimes, when the restaurant was nearly empty, she would pass by the corner of the hall where an old grand piano stood. It was rarely used these days, more decoration than instrument. The pianist who came in for special events only played twice a week. Still, the sight of the piano always made her slow her steps. She would glance at its glossy surface, her fingers twitching slightly as if remembering what it felt like to touch the keys. No one at the restaurant knew she had once studied music. She had entered a conservatory at 19, full of hope and determination. Her mother had cried when she got the letter of acceptance. It had been a dream come true for both of them. Her father had left years earlier, so her mother worked double shifts to support her, but a few months into her studies, her mother fell sick. The bills piled up, and Lena had no choice but to leave school. It was supposed to be temporary, just until things got better. But temporary stretched into years. The dinner crowd began to grow noisier, and Lena was pulled back into the moment. The sound of silverware clinking and chairs scraping the floor filled her ears. She moved from table to table, balancing trays, taking orders, cleaning spills, smiling endlessly. Her feet throbbed, but she didn't let it show. At one table, a young couple was arguing quietly. At another, a group of office workers celebrated a promotion with too much champagne. The pianist wasn't scheduled that night, so the only music was the low hum from the speakers. Soft, predictable background tunes meant to fill silence, not emotion. Lena missed real music. She missed the way notes could change a mood, the way melody could tell a story words couldn't. Sometimes when she washed dishes in the back, she would hum little fragments of old pieces she once practiced. The kitchen staff would tease her gently. "You sing like you belong on stage, not here." She would just laugh it off. Later that evening, she got a short break. She walked outside through the back door, letting the cool air brush her face. The city lights flickered in the distance. She pulled her phone from her apron pocket and checked her messages. There was one from her mother, just a simple line. "Don't forget to eat, dear." She smiled softly. Her mother always worried, even though it was Lena who carried the heavier burden now. She texted back quickly, "I will. Love you." When she went back inside, she passed the piano again. The light above it was dim, but she could still see the black and white keys shining faintly. For a moment, she stood there, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. Then, almost without thinking, she reached out and pressed one key, softly, just enough to hear the sound. It was slightly out of tune, but still beautiful. A memory flickered in her mind. Her younger self sitting in a small apartment, her mother listening proudly as she practiced Chopin. The echo of those days lingered for a second before she pulled her hand away. "Lena, what are you doing?" She turned quickly. It was her coworker Jenny balancing a tray of desserts. Lena smiled faintly. Nothing. Just looking, Jenny chuckled. Looking, huh? You planning to play that thing one day? Lena shrugged. Maybe, when no one's around, Jenny grinned. You should. That piano's just sitting there gathering dust. You might scare the manager, though. They laughed softly before going back to work. The rest of the evening went by in a blur. She carried trays, refilled glasses, apologized for delays, and smiled until her cheeks hurt. The guests were demanding, as always. One of them complained that his steak was too cold. Another asked for water 3 times in 5 minutes. Still, Lena handled it all with patience. When the restaurant finally started to empty, she felt relief wash over her. She cleaned her section, stacked the chairs, and helped the others wipe down tables. The manager walked past, giving his usual short comments. Tables polished. Check the cutlery. Don't forget the glass rack. His voice was brisk but not unkind, just tired like everyone else's. By the time she left the restaurant, the streets were quiet. She wrapped her coat around herself and walked toward the bus stop. The wind carried the faint sound of a distant musician playing guitar near the station. She stopped for a moment to listen. The tune was simple but full of feeling. It reminded her that music still lived somewhere, even if it wasn't in her life right now. When she got home, her mother was asleep on the couch with the TV on low volume. Lena gently covered her with a blanket, turned off the screen, and went to the small kitchen. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, staring at the lights from other apartments. Somewhere, someone might be playing a piano right now, maybe even one of her old classmates. The thought made her heart ache a little. She opened a small box she kept hidden in a drawer. Inside were a few yellowed music sheets, handwritten notes, and a photo of her sitting at a piano during a school recital. Her hands were smaller then, her eyes bright with confidence. She touched the edge of the paper and smiled sadly. One day, she thought. One day, maybe I'll play again. The next morning came too soon. She woke up before sunrise, packed her lunch, and hurried to catch the early bus. The city was still waking up. The smell of coffee from nearby cafes filled the air. She took a deep breath and prepared herself for another long day. At the restaurant, everyone was buzzing around preparing for a special evening event. A large company had booked the place for an anniversary celebration, and everything had to be perfect. The manager's voice echoed through the hallway as he gave instructions. No delays tonight. Keep the service smooth. This client is important. Lena joined the rest of the staff, polishing glasses and setting up tables. The air was full of nervous energy. The event meant good tips, but also extra pressure. By noon, she was already exhausted, but she kept going. She needed the money, and she couldn't afford to lose focus. Her manager was especially tense that day, checking every detail twice. Lena, he called, pointing toward the piano in the corner. Make sure that thing's clean. They're supposed to have live music tonight. She nodded and grabbed a soft cloth. As she wiped the dust from the keys, her reflection appeared faintly on the shiny black surface. It almost felt like the piano was looking back at her. She whispered quietly, "You'll get to sing again tonight." If anyone had heard her, they might have thought she was talking to herself, but to her the piano was something alive. Something that understood silence better than people did. Later, when the pianist arrived for rehearsal, Lena lingered at the edge of the hall, pretending to arrange flowers so she could listen. The man's fingers moved effortlessly, the melody smooth and rich. She closed her eyes for a second, letting herself drift into the sound. It had been years since she heard music that close again. The manager's voice snapped her back to reality. "Lena, the catering truck's here. Help unload." She hurried off, shaking away the moment. There was no space for daydreaming now. That night's event would be big, and she didn't know that by the next evening everything about her life was about to change. But for now, she was just a waitress, one among many. Invisible in the glow of chandeliers, quietly carrying her dreams in her heart while polishing glasses and setting tables. She didn't know that fate was listening, waiting for the right moment to push her toward the piano she kept glancing at. Sometimes the music we leave behind finds its own way back to us. The evening was already off to a chaotic start. The restaurant was buzzing with activity as the staff scrambled to prepare for the special event. Guests began arriving in groups, all dressed in their best clothes, exchanging polite greetings and excited chatter. The high-end corporate celebration was important, and everyone knew it. The manager was on edge, running around, barking orders at everyone. Lena was used to the pressure, but tonight felt different. The weight of expectations seemed heavier than usual. She took a deep breath as she carried her tray of drinks toward the first table, trying to keep her focus on the job at hand. There was a lot to do, and she needed to stay sharp if she wanted to get through the night. As she passed by the grand piano in the corner, she couldn't help but notice that it was gathering more attention than usual. A few guests dressed in sleek suits paused to admire it, pointing and commenting on how nice it looked in the room. Lena felt a pang of longing, the sight of it pulling her thoughts away from the bustling scene around her. She forced herself to move past it, but the memory of the last time she had stood at that piano kept creeping back. She had briefly touched the keys just the day before, and the sound lingered in her mind. For a brief moment, the noise of the restaurant faded away and she could almost hear the music again. But tonight, there was no time for thinking about the piano or her old dreams. She had to focus on the guests, the orders, the tips, and getting everything right. The manager was moving through the crowd like a hawk, watching everyone's movements with sharp eyes. He had an uncanny ability to spot even the smallest mistake. Lena had learned early on that working under his watch meant constantly being on her toes. "Lena," the manager's voice broke through her thoughts and she turned quickly. He was standing near the entrance, looking frustrated. "We're missing the desserts for table 4. Get on it, will you?" Lena nodded and quickly moved toward the kitchen. The kitchen staff were just as frantic as she was, running back and forth between the ovens and the counters. The smell of fresh pastries and cooked meats filled the air, making Lena's stomach growl despite the exhaustion in her legs. She grabbed the desserts and headed back into the dining area, her eyes scanning the room for table 4. As she approached, she saw the table of 6, all high-level employees from a tech company, laughing and chatting. They looked like they had been drinking for a while, their faces flushed and their voices loud. It was the kind of crowd that didn't care about the people serving them, just as long as their food and drinks were on time. Lena placed the desserts on the table with a practiced smile, making sure to be polite but not too engaging. As she did, she overheard part of their conversation. "You heard the pianist was supposed to play tonight?" one of the men said, clearly speaking to anyone who would listen. But he backed out at the last minute. "Really?" said another guest. "That's a shame. I was looking forward to hearing some live music. It's such a nice setting for it." The man who had first spoken laughed. "Guess we'll just have to deal with the canned music instead." "Not the same, but it'll have to do." Lena bit her lip, trying not to let the disappointment show on her face. She had overheard the manager talking about the situation earlier. The pianist had called in sick and there was no one available to replace him. It seemed the event would go on without any live music, leaving the restaurant's atmosphere to fall flat with nothing but background tunes from the speakers. She couldn't help but wonder why no one had thought to ask someone else to play. She knew the piano was just sitting there, waiting for a musician to breathe life into it, but she quickly pushed that thought away. She wasn't a musician anymore. After serving the table, Lena returned to the back of the restaurant to grab another round of drinks. The pressure was beginning to get to her. The evening was only halfway through, but she could feel her energy draining already. The hours seemed to stretch longer than usual, each second passing in slow motion. Just as she reached for the wine glasses, the manager appeared again, his face grim. "Lena," he called, "we have a problem. The pianist didn't show up and the client is starting to complain." "You need to fix this." Lena froze for a moment. She had expected him to say something about the dishes or a missing order, but not this. "Fix it?" she repeated, confused. "What do you mean?" "Find someone to play," he snapped, his voice filled with frustration. "I don't care if it's a waiter or a busboy, just get some music going. The client is demanding it and we can't let this event fall apart." Lena blinked, stunned. She hadn't expected to be put in charge of something like this. The piano had always felt like a distant thing, something that belonged to someone else. But the idea of getting someone else to play was ridiculous. The piano wasn't just something anyone could play. It required skill, practice, passion. "I don't know anyone who plays," Lena said quietly, her voice almost apologetic. The manager stared at her for a moment, clearly frustrated. Then his expression softened and he eyed her with a mix of disbelief and impatience. "You play, don't you?" Lena's heart skipped a beat. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. How could he know? She had never told anyone. "I overheard you once," he said, his voice slightly calmer, "talking about your past, about music. You can play, can't you?" Lena swallowed hard. She hadn't realized the manager had been paying attention to her conversations. She had tried so hard to keep her music past buried, to keep it separate from her work life. But now it seemed there was no hiding it. I used to, she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. But that was a long time ago. You're telling me you can't play for just one night? The manager's tone was a mix of disbelief and urgency. You don't have a choice, Lena. You're the only one here who can do it. Lena's mind raced. She couldn't believe this was happening. She hadn't touched a piano in years. She didn't even know if she still had the ability. The last time she played, it had been in a small room at the conservatory. It was a lifetime ago, but the manager wasn't giving her any room to argue. He was already turning to walk away, shouting to a colleague about preparing the room. Just sit at the piano and play something, he called over his shoulder. I don't care if it's simple. Just make sure it's done before the client gets upset. Lena stood there for a moment, stunned. She couldn't move, couldn't think. The words play something echoed in her mind like a mantra. Finally, she took a deep breath and walked toward the piano. Her hands shook as she approached the instrument. She could feel the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on her. The guests were still distracted with their conversations, but she could feel their eyes starting to shift in her direction. She sat down at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys for a moment. She could feel the dust on the surface, but beneath it, the familiar cool touch of the keys reminded her of who she once was. The silence in the room seemed to stretch for an eternity. She wasn't sure what to play. She didn't have time to think about it. So she just played something simple, a short piece she had learned back in her younger days. The notes were shaky at first, but as her fingers moved over the keys, something inside her seemed to awaken. The music filled the room, quiet at first, but then slowly growing. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't polished, but it was real, and it was hers. The guests stopped talking. The clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation, it all faded away. The room seemed to hold its breath. For the first time in years, Lena felt the music wrapping around her like an old friend. She played through the nerves, the doubts, and the fear. The music was hers again, and for just a few minutes it felt like nothing else in the world mattered. Lena's fingers hovered above the keys, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The grand piano was silent in front of her, a cold, imposing presence in the middle of the busy room. She wasn't sure what to do, her mind scrambling for a song, any song. But then, almost as if the piano had been waiting for her, her fingers pressed down, tentative at first, and then with more confidence. The music started slowly, like a river flowing from a small spring, unsure at first but gradually gaining strength. The guests had noticed. At first they were unsure of what was happening, their conversation slowing down. Some of them turned, eyeing her curiously, while others just continued to talk, as though the music wasn't something that could demand their attention. But soon the sound of the piano filled the entire room, pushing against the chatter and the clinking of glasses. Lena's hands shook as she played. It had been so long since she had sat at a piano. She wasn't sure if she could still do it, could still make the music come alive. But something inside her stirred. The simple melody she played slowly started to fill her with a sense of calm, the stress of the evening fading. She wasn't playing for anyone but herself. The music was hers again, and that was all that mattered. As she played, the guests began to listen more intently. Conversations grew quieter, then stopped altogether. A few people moved closer, drawn by the soft sound of the piano. At first it was just a trickle, people stopping to glance at her for a few seconds before moving back to their tables. But then one by one more guests approached the piano. Lena's eyes remained on the keys, her fingers dancing across them as if they were moving of their own accord. She had forgotten how much she had missed this, how much she had missed creating something so beautiful, so raw. It felt like everything had come full circle, like this was where she was meant to be, even if just for a few moments. She played a piece she had learned in her youth, something simple, something she could still remember. But as the notes came out, they felt more than just a song. They felt like a story. The music carried emotions she hadn't realized she was holding on to. The frustration of the years she'd spent hidden away in a job that drained her, the longing for something more, and the joy of remembering who she truly was. The guests stopped talking altogether now. They were watching her, some standing with drinks in hand, others leaning against the walls or chairs, mesmerized by the soft music filling the air. Some people stood with their mouths open, unable to believe that the quiet waitress was the one creating the music. There was a moment of stillness in the room, like everyone was holding their breath. One of the guests, a middle-aged man with silver hair, raised his hand slightly and motioned to a woman beside him. She nodded, and the two of them slowly walked toward the piano. They stood a few feet away, watching Lena play with a quiet reverence. Lena's heart began to race as she realized how many people were watching her. She was used to being invisible to the world, just another waitress in a busy restaurant. But this was different. She had their attention, and with it she felt a sense of vulnerability she hadn't expected. But despite the nerves creeping up inside her, she kept playing. Her fingers moved faster, more confidently as the music took over her mind. The tension in her body began to ease, the music becoming an escape, a way to lose herself in something pure and meaningful. She had almost forgotten how powerful music could be. It was like a language she could speak without words, a way to express everything she felt inside. The room felt smaller now, the air thicker with emotion. Lena's performance was no longer about pleasing anyone or fulfilling an obligation. It was about the freedom to just be herself, even for a few fleeting moments. As she finished the piece, her fingers lingered on the last note, letting it resonate through the room. She took a slow breath and lifted her hands from the keys, her heart still racing. The room was silent for a few seconds, as though no one quite knew how to react, and then the applause came. It started slowly but quickly grew, echoing off the walls. Lena blinked in surprise, her heart swelling in her chest. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to be met with such admiration. The applause was warm, genuine, and she couldn't help but smile, though she felt a little awkward in the spotlight. She had never been the center of attention, but right now it didn't matter. The music had done something to them. It had reached them in a way words never could. She looked up at the guests, their eyes filled with a mixture of awe and admiration. Some of them were still standing, clapping, while others nodded appreciatively from their tables. For a brief moment, Lena allowed herself to bask in the praise, to let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was good enough for more than just serving food and drinks. The manager appeared at her side, his expression a mixture of shock and pride. He hadn't expected this either. His eyes were wide, and for the first time in a long time, Lena saw him hesitate. He looked at her as though seeing her for the first time. "That was incredible," he said, his voice quieter than usual. Lena's smile faltered. I'm glad you liked it," she said, her voice soft. "I didn't know I could still play." The manager looked at her for a long moment before nodding. "I didn't know either," he said, still a little stunned. "But that was something special, Lena." As the applause began to die down, a few of the guests made their way up to her, offering praise and kind words. They asked her where she had learned to play, how long she had been playing. She answered as best as she could, not really knowing how to explain that she had once dreamed of performing, of making music her life, but had set those dreams aside years ago. It felt strange to talk about it, like a part of her that had been buried for so long was suddenly being dragged into the light. But it didn't feel bad. It didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a gift, like a chance to finally share something of herself with the world. One of the women who had been sitting at a nearby table came over with a drink in hand. She smiled warmly at Lena. "That was amazing," she said. "I didn't know the restaurant had such talent in-house." Lena laughed nervously, feeling a blush creep up her neck. "I'm just a waitress," she said, trying to deflect the compliment. The woman tilted her head, considering her for a moment. "You're more than that," she said, her tone thoughtful. "You have something special. You should pursue it." Lena's breath caught in her throat. She had heard similar things from her family, but hearing them from a stranger, someone who had just witnessed her playing, made it feel different, real even. Before she could respond, the woman added, "I'm actually a talent agent. I represent a few musicians in the city. If you ever want to take your music further, I'd be happy to help you." Lena blinked, unsure if she had heard her right. "You're a talent agent?" she asked, her voice betraying her disbelief. The woman smiled. "Yes, I've been in the business for a long time, and I know talent when I see it. I'd love to hear more from you." The words felt like a dream. Lena stood frozen for a moment, the weight of what was happening sinking in. Could this really be happening? Was she really being offered a chance to pursue her music? The room around her seemed to fade as the woman handed her a business card, a small piece of paper that suddenly felt like a lifeline. "Take your time," the woman said, her smile warm. "But don't let this talent go to waste." Lena nodded, too stunned to speak. She looked down at the card in her hand, the words on it blurring as her eyes filled with tears. For a moment she couldn't believe it. She had played a few simple songs on a piano, and now here she was, being offered a chance to reclaim the dream she had abandoned so long ago. As the evening wound down, Lena could barely contain the excitement that was building inside her. The rest of the night passed in a blur of gratitude and polite conversation. She was still processing what had just happened. A part of her wondered if it had all been some kind of fantasy, a fleeting moment that would vanish when the clock struck midnight. But deep down she knew it wasn't. It was real, and for the first time in years, she felt like she had a future beyond the walls of the restaurant. The piano had given her more than music that night. It had given her hope. Lena couldn't stop thinking about the talent agent's offer. The card she had given her felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket. It was all too surreal. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Guests came and went. The usual restaurant chaos continued, but none of it seemed to matter anymore. The sound of the piano still echoed in her mind, and all she could think about was the unexpected chance that had been handed to her. When the shift finally ended, Lena stepped out into the cool night air. She had expected to feel relieved, to feel like the weight of the night's work had finally lifted, but all she felt was a mix of excitement and uncertainty, like standing at the edge of something big, something life-changing, but not knowing whether she should take the first step. She glanced at the card again as she made her way home. It was simple, just a name, a phone number, and an email address. But to Lena, it felt like it held the key to a door she hadn't even known was there. Her apartment was small and quiet when she walked in, the only sound being the faint hum of the refrigerator. She tossed her bag onto the couch and sat down on the edge of her bed, still holding the card in her hand. For a moment, she just stared at it, trying to decide if she should call, if she should take the risk. What if it was all a mistake? What if the woman had just been polite, saying things people say when they want to seem nice but don't really mean it? What if this was just another dream that would end in disappointment? Lena shook her head, trying to push the doubts away. She had been running from her dreams for so long. She had spent years convincing herself that her past, her love for music, was nothing more than a hobby. But now this opportunity had fallen into her lap, and she couldn't just ignore it. Her hands shook as she picked up the phone, her thumb hovering over the number. She hesitated, thinking back to the days when she was a child, when she believed in everything with an open heart, when the piano was her best friend and her escape. It felt like that part of her had been locked away for years, and now someone was offering her a chance to bring it back. With a deep breath, Lena pressed the number. The phone rang, each second stretching longer than the last. She wasn't sure what she was expecting. Maybe someone to pick up and say it was a mistake, or maybe no one would answer at all. But then the phone clicked and a voice on the other end spoke. "Hello?" Lena froze. She had to remind herself to breathe. "Hi," she said, her voice shaky. I'm calling about the offer you made last night." There was a pause, and then the voice responded, warm and encouraging. "Ah, yes. I'm glad you called. I was hoping you would." Lena smiled, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease just a little. "I'm not sure if you remember me, but I'm the one who played the piano at the event." "I remember you," the voice said, clearly enthusiastic. "You were amazing. Honestly, I don't think I've heard anyone play with that kind of passion in a long time." Lena felt a blush creep up her neck. "Thank you. I wasn't expecting it to go so well. I haven't played in a long time." "I could tell," the voice continued. "But that's the thing. You've got something special, and I'd love to help you bring that out. You have so much potential, Lena. I really think you could go far with the right guidance." The words were almost too much to absorb. It felt like the kind of encouragement she hadn't received in years, words she hadn't dared to believe in for a long time. I don't know," Lena said, her doubts creeping in again. "I've spent so long away from music. I don't know if I'm really good enough." "Nonsense," the voice replied firmly. "You're more than good enough. You've got a gift and you just need someone to help you develop it. I've seen a lot of musicians, Lena. I know what I'm talking about. Lena took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. But I've been a waitress for so long I don't even know where to start. That's okay, the woman said kindly. Everyone starts somewhere. I can help you with the next step. It's not about starting over. It's about finding your way forward. I can set up a meeting with some people who can help you record, who can help you find the right direction. But you have to be willing to take that first step. Lena felt her heart pounding in her chest. Could this really be happening? Was she really about to take that first step? She had dreamed of something like this, but it always felt too out of reach. It was easier to push those dreams aside and live in the present, but now the opportunity was right in front of her. I want to, she said quietly. I want to do this. I just don't know if I can. You can, the woman said, her voice full of confidence, and I'll be with you every step of the way. Just take that first step, Lena. Let's see where it takes you. Lena paused, her mind swirling. She had no idea what would happen next, but for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was the chance she had been waiting for. Okay, she said, her voice steadier now. Let's do it. Great, the woman said, sounding pleased. I'll set up a meeting with my team. They'll be in touch with you soon. I'm really excited, Lena. I think this could be the start of something big. As they exchanged contact details and set up a time to meet, Lena's heart felt light for the first time in what seemed like forever. The road ahead was uncertain, but at least it was a road she was willing to walk down. When the call ended, Lena sat in silence for a moment, letting the words sink in. The excitement and fear mixed inside her, but they weren't overwhelming anymore. It felt like the first real step towards something she had almost given up on. Over the next few days, Lena kept thinking about the meeting. She practiced at home in the small hours of the morning, trying to regain some of the skills she had lost over the years. It wasn't easy. Her hands felt stiff, her playing uneven, but it felt good to be doing it again. She had been so afraid of losing that part of herself, but now she was starting to realize that it hadn't gone anywhere. It had just been waiting for the right moment to come back to life. The day of the meeting arrived faster than she expected. Lena had never been to a talent agency before, and the thought of walking into one felt like stepping into a completely different world. She dressed carefully, neatly, but casually, and made her way to the address the woman had given her. As she walked into the building, her heart was pounding. The lobby was sleek, modern, with polished floors and high ceilings. It felt intimidating but also exciting. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but it certainly wasn't this level of professionalism. A woman at the front desk smiled at her and asked if she was there for the meeting with the agent. Lena nodded, and the woman led her down a long corridor to a large office. When the door opened, Lena was greeted by the same agent who had spoken to her on the phone. "Lena," the woman said warmly, standing up to shake her hand. "I'm so glad you could make it. Please come in." Lena sat down, trying to hide the nerves that were bubbling up inside her. She had no idea what to expect, but the agent seemed confident, which made her feel a little more at ease. "Tell me more about yourself," the agent said, sitting down across from her. "What have you been doing since we met?" Lena hesitated, trying to gather her thoughts. "I've been working as a waitress. I stopped playing the piano years ago. I didn't think it was possible to pursue music anymore." The agent listened carefully, her eyes focused on Lena. "And now you're ready to change that?" she asked. Lena nodded, feeling a rush of emotion. "Yes. I don't know where it will go, but I'm ready to try." The agent smiled, her eyes twinkling. "That's all I need to hear." Lena didn't know what would happen next, but in that moment she felt like she was finally on the right path. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, she felt like it was hers to walk. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Lena couldn't believe how quickly everything was falling into place. She had spent years thinking her dreams were out of reach, but now, with each passing day, it seemed like the universe was aligning in her favor. The talent agent had connected her with a studio, a small, independent one in the city, and they were ready to start recording. It felt like an impossible dream, but Lena was determined to make it a reality. She was nervous, of course. The thought of recording in a professional studio was intimidating. She had only played for herself or for small audiences before. Now it was different. The night before her first recording session, Lena couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in her small bed, her thoughts racing. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she couldn't live up to the expectations? She kept thinking back to the night at the restaurant, the way the guests had applauded her. But that was a one-time thing. This was different. She finally managed to fall asleep, but her dreams were filled with half-formed melodies and voices whispering doubts. When she woke up, the nerves were still there, but they were mixed with a sense of excitement. She couldn't turn back now. At the studio, she was greeted by the engineer, a kind man in his 40s with glasses perched on his nose. He had a calm demeanor that immediately put her at ease. "You're Lena, right?" he asked, his voice warm and welcoming. "That's me," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "We've been looking forward to working with you. The agent told us you have a lot of potential." Lena smiled nervously. "I hope I can live up to that." The engineer chuckled softly. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone, just play what you feel. Let the music guide you." It was the best advice anyone had given her. She had spent so much time worrying about the outcome, about what people would think, but right now, all she had to do was play. They led her into the recording room, where the piano sat under the soft lights, its black and white keys waiting for her. The engineer set up the microphones and adjusted the sound levels. "Whenever you're ready," he said. Lena took a deep breath, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. The sound of the piano was both comforting and overwhelming. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the music come to her. She wasn't sure what she was going to play, but it didn't matter. It was the first time in a long while that she felt free to just play. Her fingers moved across the keys. It wasn't perfect. There were hesitations and mistakes, but it felt real. It felt like her. She was playing from the heart, not worried about how it sounded or what anyone would think. As she played, the music began to flow more easily. It was as if the song was already inside her, waiting to be released. Each note, each chord felt like it was telling a story. She wasn't just playing. She was connecting with something deep inside herself, something she had kept hidden for far too long. The engineer stayed quiet, letting her play. He didn't interrupt or try to guide her. He just let her do what she needed to do. After a few minutes, Lena finished the piece, her fingers lingering on the last chord. "That was beautiful," the engineer said, his voice soft and sincere. Lena opened her eyes, surprised by the calm that had washed over her. "It felt good," she said, her voice a little shaky. "I wasn't sure how it would sound, but it felt right." The engineer smiled. "That's the most important thing. You've got something really special, Lena. I think this is just the beginning." They spent the next few hours recording different pieces, capturing Lena's music in a way she had never experienced before. Each take was a little different, a little better than the last. The nervousness that had plagued her before slowly melted away as she found her rhythm. By the end of the session, Lena felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in years. She had started the day full of doubt, unsure of herself and her abilities. But now she was leaving the studio with a new sense of confidence. Over the next few weeks, Lena returned to the studio several more times. Each session felt like another step closer to something real. She worked with the engineer to fine-tune the recordings, experimenting with different sounds and arrangements. Slowly but surely, the songs that had been locked away in her heart were coming to life. As the recordings took shape, Lena began to feel more and more like an artist. It wasn't just about playing the piano anymore. It was about expressing herself through the music, sharing a piece of who she was with the world. One evening, after a particularly long recording session, Lena received a call from the talent agent. Her heart raced as she picked up the phone. "Lena," the agent said, her voice excited, "we've got some great news. We've had a few producers listen to your recordings and they're really interested. They want to meet with you." Lena's mind raced. She had been hoping for something like this, but hearing it out loud made it feel even more real. "Really, they want to meet me?" "Yes," the agent replied. This could be the beginning of something big, Lena. You've got the talent, and now it's about making the right connections. We're setting up a meeting for next week. Be prepared, okay? Lena couldn't believe it. She had been dreaming of this moment for so long, and now it was finally happening. The reality of what she was about to do began to settle in. She had no idea where this journey would take her, but for the first time in years, she was excited about the possibilities. The days leading up to the meeting felt like a blur. Lena practiced her music whenever she could, fine-tuning the songs she had recorded. She wasn't sure what the producers would want to hear, but she knew she had to be ready. She had come this far. She couldn't stop now. Finally, the day of the meeting arrived. Lena put on her best outfit, simple but elegant, and took a deep breath before stepping out the door. She felt nervous but also determined. This was her chance. The office where the meeting took place was sleek and modern, just like the studio. It had an energy that made Lena feel like she was stepping into another world. The producers were already waiting for her when she arrived. They were all seated around a large table, flipping through papers and making small talk. When Lena walked in, they all looked up, and the room fell silent for a moment. Lena felt her heart race, but she forced herself to stay calm. The producer in the center smiled at her and stood up. Lena, it's great to finally meet you. We've listened to your recordings and we're very impressed. Lena could hardly believe it. She had spent so long doubting herself, and now here she was, sitting in front of people who believed in her talent. We think you've got real potential, the producer continued. We'd love to work with you and help you develop your music further. Are you interested? Lena's breath caught in her throat. She had dreamed of this moment for so long, but hearing it now was overwhelming. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, I'm ready, the producer smiled. Great. Let's talk about the next steps. The meeting continued, but Lena wasn't really listening to the details. She was still processing what was happening. It was real. It was happening. After the meeting, as Lena walked out of the office, she couldn't help but smile. This was it. Her dreams were finally coming true. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in years, Lena felt like she was on the right path. She had found her way back to the music, and this was just the beginning.